Hello and welcome to our Bible study here, weekly Bible study. We are continuing in our series on Ecclesiastes, and we're looking at the second element of the preacher's test in chapter 2, which is the search or testing of pleasure. And so if you would, go ahead and pause the video and read Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. That'll be the section of scripture that we're going through tonight, Ecclesiastes 2, 1 through 11. All right, you got it? You read it? Let's jump on in. So first of all, first question. We looked at wisdom on Sunday as something the preacher tested. He found it vanity. What does he move on to next? And that would be pleasure. The preacher is going to test pleasure next. Now, I'd like to note here that the preacher does not frame pleasure in any sort of negative light. And that's true of all of the things that he will test and all of the things that he will call vanity when they are pursued under the sun. So wisdom, pleasure, work, those are all good things, but not when done only under the sun or disconnected from God. In fact, the word pleasure here in Ecclesiastes 2 and verse number 1, it is the word translated in Genesis as good. So when God pronounces his creation a good thing, that's the same thing that the preacher here is testing. So we might say, instead of pleasure, we might say that he is testing the good things in life, as he says he's on this pursuit of testing pleasure. So again, just to go back a little bit, pleasure is not bad, but what he's talking about here is the pursuit of pleasure under the sun, or the pursuit of pleasure without taking God into account. So that is what the preacher will be testing. Now, he goes through, after he announces this test, a number of different avenues for pleasure, and starting in verse number 3. So the first source of pleasure that he tests out, seeing if it does provide meaning, is wine in verse number 3. He says, I sought in my heart to give myself unto wine. We could probably include here any amount of substances, or if we looked at it in a more positive light, we could just think of food and drink, those things that we consume. Again, these are not necessarily bad things. That's not the framing of the preacher, but he tests those things out. He then, in verses 4 through 8, he moves on from wine, and he is going to test out pleasure in great works and possessions. And as you read through verses 4 through 8, it reminds me of an episode of HGTV, right? All these extravagant things, so many things that belong to him, and so many things that he has put his name on. Notice that he is doing all of this for himself. You'll see the repetition of me, me, me. I made me great works, right? Verses 4 through 8, you see that repetition of me, or you might say, I did this for myself, myself, myself. He wanted to put his name on everything. There is a certain pleasure that comes from doing things, taking credit for things, and of course, owning many possessions. In verse 8, midway through the verse, then he switches over. Because he didn't find pleasure in those great works for possession, he didn't find meaning in those great works for possessions. He then switches over to what could be classified as art. He's seeking out pleasure, seeing if there's meaning in the pleasure of art. So in verse 8, he mentions silver, gold, and peculiar treasure of kings and of the provinces. He also says that he got men and women singers. And so he's surrounding himself with art and with beauty, art in the sense of treasures, art in the sense of music, and he tests that out as a source of meaning as well. And then at the end of verse number 8, there's some question on exactly how this should be translated. The word translated as musical instruments in the King James, it is a word that is not found anywhere else in the Hebrew Old Testament, so there's a lot of difficulty in translating that. It is repeated, and that's why it's translated as musical instruments and that of all sorts. So it's repeated in the singular and then in the plural. And so what does that mean? It could mean musical instruments. It could be connected with his pursuit of art. but I think there's also a very good possibility that he is pursuing meaning in sexual pleasure. And so he says in verse number 8, the delights of the sons of men, or the delights of the flesh. And very well, you could translate musical instruments rather than musical instruments as concubines. And I think that would be very consistent with Solomon, that he sought pleasure not only in wealth and possessions and in wine, but also in sexual pleasure with all of these concubines. In 1 Kings 11 and verse 3, whether or not this should be translated as something other than musical instruments, 1 Kings 11 and verse 3 would back this up anyway, where Solomon, it said of him that he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines. And his wives turned away his heart. So this is something he invested deeply in, something he sought meaning in, and he put them in a place that God should be in. And so he tests out all of these sources of pleasure as a means of finding meaning. And those things, again, were wine, great works and possessions, art, and then sex. Now, what is the preacher's conclusion about pleasure? Well, he doesn't leave us wondering. In verses 1 and 2, he says right away as he begins this test, "Behold, this is also vanity. I said of laughter, it is mad, and of mirth, what doeth it?" He doesn't find meaning. He doesn't find purpose in pleasure pursued horizontally or under the sun. He repeats this again in verses 10 and 11, where he says, "Whatsoever mine eyes desired, I kept not from them." So if you might say, well, he just didn't have enough pleasure. No, he says, I had access to everything, and I withheld not my heart from any joy, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my portion of all my labor. Then I looked on all the works that my hands had wrought, and on the labor that I had labored to do, and behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no profit under the sun. And so the preacher concludes that the pursuit of pleasure under the sun is also vanity. It's elusive. It's a vapor. It doesn't give meaning. There's no permanence there. There's no satisfaction there, right? Pleasure itself does not bring meaning and fulfillment to life. Now, if we fast forward a little bit and go to the end of chapter 2, we can see the converse to that. Pleasure itself as a pursuit does not bring meaning, but enjoying the good things in life as God has designed them to be enjoyed, right? Not having 300 concubines, but enjoying the good things as God has designed them to be enjoyed, and recognizing that those things are gifts from Him, that's not vanity. And so in Ecclesiastes 2:26, he says, "For God giveth to a man that is good in his sight wisdom and knowledge and joy," or pleasure, mirth, right? And when those things are connected with our pursuit of God and we do them for His glory, and we enjoy them as gifts from Him and how He designed them to be enjoyed, there is meaning. It's not vanity. It's not empty. It's not fleeting. And so the question that we end with this week is, will we pursue pleasure as our goal in life, or will we seek to serve and enjoy God and enjoy pleasure His way? So check out the description for some discussion questions, and look forward to exploring this a little further on Sunday morning. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.